He was the hero of millions, the unstoppable force who slammed giants, sold out arenas, and built an empire on pure charisma. Kids wore his colors, parents trusted his words, and the world believed Hulkamania would live forever. But behind the bright lights and deafening cheers was a man whose real battles were fought far from the ring. Betrayals, scandals, heartbreak, and a fall from grace that no script could save him from. This is the real story of Hulk Hogan, a legend's rise to immortality, his crash into controversy, and the complicated legacy he left behind. Terry Eugene Bollea was born on August 11, 1953, in Augusta, Georgia, but it was Tampa, Florida, where he would grow up and where his dreams and his demons would take shape. The Bollea family wasn't rich. They lived in a small, modest home. His father, Pietro Peter Bollea, was a construction foreman of Italian descent. His mother, Ruth, was a dance teacher with a Scottish heritage. They were loving parents, but life was far from glamorous. From an early age, Terry stood out physically big for his age, broad-shouldered, a presence in any room. But being different didn't always work in his favor. At school, he was often teased for his size. Kids called him Fathead because of the shape of his skull, and they mocked his weight. For a boy already struggling to fit in, the cruelty cut deep. When the world outside felt hostile, he turned inward and toward the television set. On the screen, he found larger-than-life heroes who fought not with guns or politics, but with strength, charisma, and willpower. Professional wrestling in the 1960s was a strange, almost mysterious spectacle to most. To Terry, it was magic. He became obsessed with icons like the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and the massively muscled superstar Billy Graham. Rhodes represented heart and soul, a man who could talk his way into your emotions. Graham embodied the physical ideal: massive arms, bulging chest, a walking comic book hero. Terry wanted to be both. But before wrestling came into his life for real, music did. In his teens, he picked up a bass guitar and started playing in local bands. He had the look: long blonde hair, tall, powerful frame, and the dream of being a rock star. His parents were skeptical but supportive enough to let him try. After high school, he attended the University of South Florida, but the classroom could never compete with the call of the stage. He dropped out to chase music full-time. It was during those years playing Florida clubs that fate intervened. Wrestlers would sometimes visit local bars, and one night, a few took notice of the giant man playing bass in a cover band. They told him he had the look to be in the ring. It was a seed planted one that would grow into something bigger than Terry could ever imagine. When he finally decided to train, he sought out Hiro Matsuda, a legendary Japanese wrestling trainer. Matsuda didn't believe in easy beginnings. On Terry's first day, Matsuda locked him in a hold, twisted hard, and broke his leg. It was a test. Most would have quit. Terry came back after healing, determined. Pain, he learned, was just part of the business. By 1979, he was in the World Wrestling Federation, though at the time the WWF wasn't the global giant it would become. Vince McMahon Sr. saw potential and gave him a name to match his size: Hulk Hogan. The Hulk came from his resemblance in size to Lou Ferrigno, who played the Incredible Hulk on TV. Hogan gave it an Irish flair that fans would remember. Yet success wasn't instant. The young Hogan paid his dues in matches that barely drew crowds. The turning point came from an unexpected source: Hollywood. In 1981, actor Sylvester Stallone, preparing for Rocky Roman III, wanted a physically imposing opponent for his character, Rocky Balboa. Hogan fit the bill. In the film, he played Thunderlips, the ultimate male, a towering, flamboyant wrestler who overpowers Rocky in a charity match. Filming was chaotic. Hogan's sheer force was dangerous. Stallone ended up with a broken collarbone, and 2 stuntmen were hospitalized. But the scenes worked, and the movie became a blockbuster. That success came with a cost. Vince McMahon Sr. didn't want his wrestlers working outside gigs, so Hogan was fired. For a time, it seemed like he'd have to rebuild from scratch. The real change came when Vince McMahon Jr. took over the WWF from his father. Vince Jr. had a vision to take wrestling national, turn it into sports entertainment, and market it like never before. He needed a face for that vision. He called Hogan back, and Hogan delivered. In 1984, he won the WWF Championship from the Iron Sheik in Madison Square Garden. The crowd erupted. Hogan was presented as the ultimate good guy, an all-American hero who told kids to train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins. His physique was unmatched, his charisma electrifying. Merchandise sales exploded. Television audiences grew. Pay-per-view wrestling became a phenomenon. Hulkamania was born. It wasn't just wrestling anymore, it was a movement. Children wore the red and yellow, waving foam fingers and chanting Hogan, Hogan. He became a Saturday morning cartoon hero, appeared in action figures, lunchboxes, and commercials. Parents trusted him, kids idolized him, but fame is a double-edged sword, and even in these golden years, shadows were forming at the edges of Hulkamania. Hulk Hogan was now the face of professional wrestling. From the mid-1980s onward, he wasn't just an athlete, he was a brand. His matches were events. His image was on posters, lunchboxes, and cereal boxes. The Hulkster was everywhere, but behind the bright lights of WrestleMania and the roar of arenas, life for Terry Bollea was far more complicated. In 1985, while promoting wrestling on a talk show called Hot Properties, host Richard Belzer jokingly asked Hogan to demonstrate a wrestling move. Hogan locked in a front chokehold. Belzer collapsed, unconscious, hitting his head and bleeding on live television. The clip went public, and while Hogan brushed it off as a misunderstanding, it planted the first seeds of controversy in his public image. That same year, WrestleMania debuted a gamble by Vince McMahon that combined celebrity spectacle with wrestling. Hogan headlined the main event alongside Mr. T, drawing massive pay-per-view numbers. Overnight, he became the single most important figure in Vince's empire. But being at the top came with its own politics. In 1986, Jesse the Body Ventura tried to start a wrestlers' union. Wrestlers were independent contractors, no health insurance, no retirement plans, no guaranteed pay when injured. Ventura believed they needed to band together. Many agreed, but without Hogan's backing, the movement was doomed. Hogan went to Vince and told him everything, effectively killing the union before it started. Years later, Ventura would call it a betrayal, saying Hogan chose loyalty to management over solidarity with his peers. While Hulkamania continued to dominate the ring, Terry's personal life took a tragic turn. That summer, his brother Alan, married to an older woman, lost his wife to murder. Overcome with grief, Alan took his own life. 4 children were left behind. Hogan and his wife Linda took in 3 of them, raising them as their own, while Terry traveled constantly for work. The responsibility weighed heavily on Linda, who shouldered the day-to-day parenting alone. Professionally, Hogan kept breaking records. At WrestleMania Roman III in 1987, he faced the 520-pound Andre the Giant. The image of Hogan body slamming Andre became one of the most iconic moments in wrestling history. Fans believed Hogan had torn his biceps in the process, but the truth was less dramatic. Andre helped lift himself, and Hogan never took time off to heal. In reality, it was a carefully planned performance, but one that captured the imagination of millions. By the late 80s, Hogan was larger than life. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a cultural phenomenon. He starred in movies like No Holds Barred, guested on talk shows, and led children's charity events. But the more famous he became, the more the line blurred between Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan. In public, he was the squeaky, clean hero. In private, he drank heavily, partied, and enjoyed the benefits of fame. In 1990, Hogan did something rare. He passed the torch. At WrestleMania VI in Toronto, he faced the Ultimate Warrior, another muscle-bound hero. In the end, Hogan lost cleanly, handing Warrior the WWF Championship. It was supposed to mark a new era, but Warrior never reached Hogan's level of crossover fame. Off-camera, Hogan began to struggle with the demands of constant travel and the pressure to remain the top draw. Injuries piled up. His knees ached, his back throbbed, but there was no off-season in wrestling, and the money was too good to walk away. By 1994, a cloud loomed over the WWF. Vince McMahon was on trial, accused of distributing steroids to wrestlers. Hogan was called as a key witness for the prosecution, expected to testify against Vince. Instead, Hogan's testimony was vague and non-damning, helping Vince avoid a conviction. That choice may have saved WWE from collapse, but it also widened the gap between Hogan and many wrestlers who wanted the industry's darker secrets exposed. Creative differences with Vince finally boiled over. Hogan left WWF and signed with rival promotion WCW, bringing his star power with him. His arrival in 1994 was huge. He defeated Ric Flair for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship and became the face of the company. For over a year, WCW rode high on Hogan's name, but by 1996, fans were tired of the same superhero act. They wanted something new. That summer at Bash at the Beach, the unthinkable happened. Hogan turned heel, aligning himself with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to form the New World Order, the NWO. Gone was the red and yellow. In its place was black, white, and Hollywood swagger. Hogan mocked fans, sprayed NWO on fallen opponents, and played air guitar to Voodoo Child. It was the most shocking character shift in wrestling history. The fans, ironically, loved it. Hogan had reinvented himself, but the backstage politics that had always followed him became even more intense in WCW. His creative control clause gave him enormous influence over storylines, often to the frustration of other wrestlers. While NWO helped WCW beat WWF in the Monday Night War for over a year, the company eventually collapsed under its own weight, and Hogan's politicking was part of the problem. When Hulk Hogan turned heel in 1996, the wrestling world changed overnight. For over a decade, he had been the embodiment of Good the Hero in red and yellow, telling kids to eat their vitamins and say their prayers. Now, he was Hollywood Hogan, the arrogant villain at the center of the New World Order. It was a betrayal so big that fans in the arena hurled trash into the ring during his first promo as a heel. In that moment, professional wrestling entered a new era. The NWO wasn't just a storyline, it became a cultural phenomenon. Hogan's charisma, paired with the swagger of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, created a rebellious faction that blurred the lines between fiction and reality. WCW Monday Nitro began to consistently beat WWF Monday Night Raw in the ratings. Hogan was back on top, but in a darker, more complex role. His character reflected the cynicism of the late 90s. Gone was the pure comic book hero. Now he was a corrupt, self-serving egomaniac who admitted that all the training and vitamins had really been for the money. The NWO spray painted their logo on championship belts, mocked opponents in backstage skits, and turned the wrestling world upside down. But while the NWO storyline thrived, backstage politics became a minefield. Hogan had creative control in his contract, meaning he could veto any storyline or match outcome he didn't like. Other wrestlers accused him of refusing to lose to younger talent, protecting his position at the top. This created resentment among peers and, over time, made it harder for WCW to build new stars. Still, there were moments of brilliance. Hogan's feuds with Macho Man, Randy Savage, Sting, and Goldberg drew massive audiences. When Goldberg finally defeated Hogan cleanly in 1998 on Nitro, it was one of WCW high-strated moments, but it also highlighted a problem. Hogan's reluctance to lose made moments like that rare and therefore hard to sustain. As the Monday Night Wars raged, Vince McMahon's WWF reinvented itself with the Attitude Era edgier content. New stars like The Rock and Stone Cold, Steve Austin, and a more rebellious tone. Slowly, the tide began to turn. WCW ratings advantage slipped. Internal chaos, overspending, and ego clashes started to erode the company from within. By 1999, WCW was in trouble. Hogan's on-screen character went through multiple changes, sometimes heel, sometimes face, confusing the audience. In one infamous incident at Bash at the Beach 2000, a storyline dispute between Hogan and WCW booker Vince Russo spilled into reality. Russo publicly buried Hogan on live television, accusing him of refusing to put over younger talent. Hogan walked out and never returned to WCW. When WCW collapsed in 2001 and was bought by WWE, Hogan's future was uncertain. But in 2002, he returned to WWE alongside Hall and Nash as part of the NWO Invasion storyline. The crowd reaction shocked everyone. Instead of booing the villain, fans erupted in cheers for Hogan. This led to one of the most iconic matches in wrestling history, WrestleMania X8, Toronto, 2002. Hulk Hogan vs. The Rock Icon vs. Icon. The atmosphere was electric. Hogan was supposed to be the bad guy, but the crowd turned, cheering him louder than The Rock. The two adapted mid-match, giving the fans a classic that is still talked about today. In the weeks that followed, Hogan ditched the black and white and returned to the red and yellow. He became WWE Undisputed Champion again at age 48, but the run was short. Injuries and age caught up with him. By 2003, he stepped away for knee surgery and recovery. When he came back in 2005 for one final run, he won every match he was in, frustrating opponents who wanted more balanced storytelling. His match with Shawn Michaels at SummerSlam 2005 became infamous for Michaels overselling Hogan's moves in a cartoonish fashion, a subtle way of mocking Hogan's refusal to lose. By 2006, Hogan was effectively retired from full-time wrestling. But outside the ring, the real battles were just beginning. Retirement didn't slow down the chaos in Terry Bollea's life. If anything, stepping away from the ring gave space for personal issues to explode into the public eye. In 2005, Hogan and his family launched a reality show, Hogan Knows Best. At first, it seemed like harmless entertainment, the daily lives of wrestling's biggest star, his wife Linda, daughter Brooke, and son Nick. But behind the smiles and scripted family moments, cracks in the foundation were widening. The cameras caught arguments, controlling behavior, and Hogan's tendency to be overprotective, especially toward Brooke. He invested millions into her music career, but commercial success never came. He tracked her with GPS devices, publicly criticized her boyfriends, and seemed to have difficulty separating himself from her life as an adult. Then came tragedy. In 2007, Nick was involved in a serious car crash in Clearwater, Florida. He was speeding, lost control, and slammed into a palm tree. Nick survived, but his passenger, a friend, was left with permanent brain damage. Nick was sentenced to 8 months in jail. Just 3 months after his release, Linda filed for divorce. What followed was a public unraveling. Linda accused Hogan of infidelity, claiming he'd had an affair with Brooke's close friend, who was decades younger. Brooke later alleged years of verbal and even physical abuse from her father, eventually cutting off all contact. Hogan never met his grandchildren. In 2012, a bombshell hit. A sex tape surfaced showing Hogan with the wife of his best friend, Bubba the Love Sponge. The encounter had happened years earlier during his divorce, but the video had been recorded without Hogan's knowledge. He sued Gawker Media, the site that published it, for invasion of privacy. The legal battle became a media circus, ending with Hogan awarded $140 million in damages, a sum that bankrupted Gawker. After taxes and settlements, Hogan walked away with about $10 million. But the tape scandal wasn't over. In 2015, an audio recording from the same footage leaked, capturing Hogan using racial slurs. WWE cut all ties immediately, firing him and removing him from their Hall of Fame. His merchandise disappeared from WWE online store. Hogan's 40-year career seemed to vanish overnight. In the years that followed, Hogan began a slow, deliberate attempt at rebuilding his image. He issued public apologies, admitted to personal failings, and openly asked for forgiveness. In 2018, WWE reinstated him into the Hall of Fame. 2 years later, the NWO was inducted as a group, making Hogan a two-time Hall of Famer. In his personal life, Hogan remarried in 2010 to Jennifer McDaniel, crediting her with helping him find peace. By 2022, he claimed to have quit drinking entirely. Faith became central to his life. He and his wife were baptized in 2023. He spoke openly about regret, about the difference between Hulk Hogan, the character, and Terry Bollea, the man. Physically, decades in the ring had taken their toll. His knees and hips were artificial, his back full of metal. The knees are fake, the hips are fake. He'd say, the back's full of screws, but I gave everything to the business. Hogan's last WWE appearance came quietly, almost awkwardly. The crowd's reaction was lukewarm. Some legends in the back laughed at him, but 7 months later, when news broke that he had passed away at the age of 71, the wrestling world changed its tone. Social media filled with tributes. Fans remembered not the scandals, but the moments, the slams, the poses, the finger points to the sky. Even his fiercest rivals acknowledged his impact. Macho Man Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior had their share of bitter history with Hogan, but their stories with him were forever tied to wrestling's golden era. Whether reconciliations were real or just for the fans, the moments they created together became immortal. In the end, Hulk Hogan's story was one of contradictions. He was the man who made professional wrestling a global phenomenon, yet often put his own interests ahead of others. He inspired millions of kids, yet failed in many ways as a husband and father. He built an empire, lost it all, and still managed to find a form of redemption before the final bell. As the years pass, the scandals may fade in public memory, but the image of the man tearing his shirt, cupping his ear to the crowd, and telling the world to believe in yourself, will remain. Because for all his flaws, Hulk Hogan was and will always be one of the most important wrestlers in history. Hulkamania, in its own way, will live forever.